everybody, it's me, Laura, and today we're going to be creating some marbleized eggs and jewelry in blues. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, how'd this one come about? Well, I got a little request from somebody, so I thought, why not? Let's go ahead and do this. So I'm bringing in, this is like a pearlized purple blue here that I just cut, and then I've got some translucent, and I've also got a little bit of my pearlized clay which I bring in along with a medium blue and a turquoise. And so I'm going to take all of this and I'm going to just kind of cut it up just randomly. I'm putting some together, I'm just tearing it apart. That's what I'm going to be doing here. I'm just going to be chopping up each of these little smaller bricks of polymer clay, and we're just going to get tiny pieces. And really, if you could chop this up as fine as possible, that would be great. Now, I didn't use a whole lot here, and you really don't need a ton. I'd say, maybe a quarter of a brick or less of each color, definitely, because you don't need a ton to do this. So right here, I'm just taking my tissue blade and I'm just cutting all of this up into just little bits and parts. And I want to say a little bit of my translucent was pretty well, how do I say, conditioned. So I need to really kind of chop that up, and sometimes you have to tear it apart. So do that a little bit. And then once you get that all kind of chopped up, we're going to bring in some variegated flakes. And so it's like gold flaking, but it's a bunch of little pieces and parts. It's not a sheet. I just thought I'm going to go ahead. I had some of this on hand. I thought I'm going to go ahead and use it. I'm going to go ahead, before I do this though, I'm going to put this onto a piece of paper. Now, when I did this, and really I would have to say, don't put because you're going to put in black acrylic paint, okay? And when you put the black acrylic paint down, and this is on a piece of paper, it's going to wet that paper, and the paper's going to want to tear up with it. Yeah, lesson learned here. Don't do it right away, especially if you have to walk away for a little bit because you forgot something. And part of this was because I brought in some finger cots to kind of protect my hands a little bit. I would say use latex gloves. I couldn't find my latex glove. I don't know where they went to, but there it is. Anyways, I'm mixing up my black acrylic paint into this as much as possible. And while I'm doing that, I'm adding in this black, right? When you do this, and I let it dry a little bit, but then I bring in that, like I said, those flakes, and I'm going to mix it in with these little bits and pieces that have been covered in that black paint. Okay, so you can tell here I've taken some more of that translucent clay and I'm kind of ripping bits and parts and pieces into that. I didn't go ahead and just cover it all in black. And then that's my variegated flake. We're going to throw in some of this, and I just kind of poured it in there. Whatever I had, right? And we're going to go ahead and eventually take all of this, and I took my finger cots off. Most of my paint had kind of like dried up. You could tell there I picked up a little bit from the paper, hence the idea. Maybe not use paper, use some other, just use your tile, really. I probably should have done that, but I wanted to try and keep my surface a little bit more clean than usual. Anyways, I'm taking all my pieces and parts, picking up the gold flaking wherever I've got it, and putting it together in one giant wad. All right, once you have this wad of clay together, I'm going to bring in my acrylic roller here, and my flake comes off a little bit, but not too badly. I'm going to create a brick out of this thing, and then once I do that, I'm going to bring in my blade, and I'm going to start cutting slices off of this brick. And you're going to get this like little sectioned kind of thing here with some of that gold flaking in between. And what I do is I just take some of this, I'm even cutting off the back because I've got a lot of gold flake there. It'd be really nice to use it. So I'm kind of putting it all together, and I'm going to form a sheet out of this stuff, okay? So it's going to be fairly thick. It's not going to be really thin at all. It's going to be a fairly thick sheet, and I'm just building around with these pieces. It doesn't matter, hodgepodge. Put it together where you will, right? And just if you want to try and create as much of a square kind of sheet if you can, or just a nice solid sheet. I also bring in my acrylic roller to go ahead and roll over it, kind of like join it up as best I can. And you might notice here too that my blade is kind of messy, and actually I had a little bit of super glue on that. I had to go ahead and clean it all off eventually. But try to make sure that when you're cutting down that your blade is as clean as possible. Mine was a little bit messy here, but it still got me through to get what I wanted by forming this sheet. Okay, now that we've got this sheet of clay all kind of put together, and I've used my acrylic roller, I'm still trying to put it together. There's little gaps and holes here and there. So push it together as best you can. Make sure it's all formed up. Once you do that though, I set my Atlas pasta machine on a #1 setting. And what I did was from there, and you could even go to the 0. So you could go down to your largest setting on your Atlas pasta machine, because this is fairly conditioned. You don't have to worry about it, you know, hurting the machine. But I went to a #1. I'm still using my acrylic roller to kind of join it up. I lift it up off my tile surface and then run it through your pasta machine on that #1 setting, okay? This is going to elongate it out just a little bit, okay? And it's also going to go ahead and join up any seams you might have in the clay sheet itself. Plus, when you do this, when you run it through that #1 setting, it makes that clay all the same thickness. From there, you're going to step down your machine to a #2 setting, and then a #3 setting, and then a #4 setting, and then possibly even a #5 setting, running this sheet all through those settings, stepping it down, making it thinner as you go. Once you do that, as you could tell, I'm starting to take this sheet now that's been thinned out to where I like it, and I'm covering my eggshell that has been drained. Now this sheet can get a little bit unwieldy, and when it does, I'm bringing in my scissors here and I'm just cutting off bits and parts and pieces. And then I mesh up those ends, and then when I kind of get it to a, like where the clay kind of joins up and it kind of becomes like a little peak on the egg, I'll go ahead and use my scissors and just cut it off flush, or you can even take your straight tissue blade and go ahead and cut that off flush as well. You just join it up to where it looks nice, and because this is really kind of a marbleized egg, nobody's going to notice where you made your cut marks. It's going to look like it was all that way and intended. Okay, now I'm bringing in my, like it's in the handle of my needle tool, and I'm just kind of rolling this across the egg, and then I use my hands a little bit just to kind of like form it up, just making sure it's kind of even. I also poke the hole where I drained the egg also, so this way then air can move in and out of this egg when you go to bake it. Okay, so this is probably the first time, or maybe not, I can't remember, when I approached the idea of sanding and buffing. And maybe I had talked about this before, but on Eggshell, I don't know if I've really talked about this. I'm using it's a little bit of warm water, and I've got some 400, 600, and 800 wet dry sandpaper. I'm going over this egg, and I'm just vigorously kind of sanding it out, sanding the clay, all right? You want to make it so that the shell, or I should say the egg itself, feels fairly smooth to the touch as you go. That's going to be your goal. And so you do it with the 400, you go down to the 6 and then down to the 8 where it's your finer grade of sandpaper, and going all the way around this eggshell. Once you do this, and you are going to get some gold flaking that will come off, but not a ton. That gold flaking stays in that egg pretty darn well. I was like very surprised about that. I thought maybe all of it, because I did get some off, and I was like, oh no, it's all good. No, it didn't come all off. Thank goodness, yay. And so I'm just sanding as I go here. Just remember, the main purpose of this is so that the egg is smooth all the way around. Okay, now we're going to bring in my Porter and Cable, my bench grinder, and I have a cloth wheel on this, and I'm holding onto my egg pretty well. I'm right on the very bottom part, and I'm just going to start buffing up this egg. And as I go, this thing will turn into a very high gloss, and that's what you're shooting here for. Please forgive the shakiness of this video footage. It's just that this grinder does, one, it's loud, okay, and it does create a pretty good amount of vibration. So trying to get my camera to stay still was a little bit hard. So please don't get any kind of, if you have to, look away. It's starting to get me dizzy, No, just remember, lightly put your egg up to the bench grinder. So when you go ahead and, buff this thing up, you're not going to be putting a ton. You don't want to just push it right into that cloth wheel. That's very important here, because otherwise you're just going to grind it down. It's just not going to work, okay? You want this to have a nice shine. So gently place it up to that cloth wheel and let it just kind of do its little buffing. You're going to see that shine come up pretty fast too, especially if you've sanded this thing really well. If you sand this thing really well, it's going to come up to a high shine pretty fast. And mine pretty much did. It was like, okay, this is coming up to a really nice high shine. And it's only because I used that fine grit paper, that 800. Once I get it down to that 800, it will start to, and it was really super smooth, it will come up to a nice high shine. Okay, so I had enough of this leftover clay, and when I went to cut some of this sheet, I had it where I had to reform it. And so you're going to see this kind of marbleization come out even more marbleized as you go on. So I have it where it's a little bit more blocky at the first. Well, now it's going to start, as you could tell, when I run it back through that pasta machine, it kind of gets a little bit more, the pattern becomes a little bit more marbleized. So it depends upon how many times you run it through that machine too. I also poke my hole in this egg to make sure that that air gets in and out before I bake the second egg. But you could kind of see it's got that nice gold flaking, and I'm just forming it around the egg. Okay, I'm forming the sheet around the egg, and there's a point where sometimes you might just have to go ahead and cut part of it off. And that's kind of what I do. I just take my scissors here, I cut off part of this, and I form up the rest of that clay around the egg. It's not going to completely go all the way around, and yes, I'm going to have to cut a few areas here. As you can see, I'm going to start getting that peak thing again. Have to use my scissors or my tissue blade to cut that off. But once you get it around the egg, you could go ahead and take that extra sheet and fill in the space that, is not quite covered. And it works out just fine. You'll again see me use the handle of my needle tool to kind of just roll that over the egg to make sure I get a nice, even kind of covering, all right? And then you can see me pulling apart pieces of this because, there's some really nice gold flaking in there. And I just add in right here, I'm just adding in pieces. It will work out great because it's all the same thickness. You cut it off, you form it around, it's going to look absolutely wonderful. Now, I did have a piece here, I kind of put it in the center. I was like, no, I don't like that. I eventually cut that off. So use the bits and parts and pieces of this sheet that you like the best on your egg. Okay, so at this point, I want to say both of my eggs have been baked. And I wanted to take a moment here and just kind of talk about the comparison of where I have sand and buffed the right egg and where I haven't done anything to the left side. So this gives you the difference of where you get that high gloss. And to me, when you get that sanding and buffing done on the egg, or any kind of piece that you do, it brings out, I think, your blacks, your darks, it makes things more brilliant. Whereas if you have it in just kind of the matte version here, like on my left side, you don't really see that dynamic quite so much. Okay, so once again, I'm going to go ahead and take that second egg and I'm going to go ahead and sand and buff it up. And you can already tell just from the matte side, and look at that gloss. The gloss really, when you buff that thing, I love it. One of my favorite things to do. And if you were to ask me, which one do I prefer when it comes to resin or to sanding or buffing, I would say I like the sanding and buffing method better than trying to do resin. I do resin once in a while, and part of it is just because I want to get it quickly done and over with, okay? The thing is though with resin, and this is just my own take on it, with resin, if you cover something in resin over time, that resin is going to turn yellow no matter what. If it's under UV light or anything like that, or I should say just out in regular daylight, over time, it's going to start to turn yellow. I had some pieces that I had made, and they were under fluorescent light or whatever, and they had really gone to a yellow. It was something I just did not like. So yes, you could do resin. It looks great as long as it's not put into extreme circumstances light-wise. But my preference is sanding and buffing, and the reason why is because once you get that up to a high shine, you can't take that away. It's not going to go away. That's how it is. That's how it's always going to be. It's not going to turn yellow. It's not going to have any problems with it. And you can do it not only with eggshell, but of course with your jewelry pieces as well. And we're going to be moving on to that in just a little bit. Okay, so this little sheet of clay has gone through 2 eggs already. This is my leftover, but it looks pretty darn good for leftover. And like I said, I've reformed this into a shape or into a sheet, and I'm just trying to decide which side do I want to use, because there are certain areas I like on one side, and then on the other side, well, maybe that looks good too. And I brought in my teardrop cutters to go ahead and cut it. Now, I like this one area. I'm using my largest teardrop here and just cutting down into that deli sheet, giving me a nice domed effect of that teardrop. From here, I'm going to go ahead and cut more different sized teardrops from this sheet of clay, and then we're going to create some really fun jewelry. All right, so I wanted to go ahead and show you guys, this is a really thin sheet of clay. I want to say it was done on a number 4 or 5 setting when I had done those sheets. And right here, I am going to be sanding and buffing these things. Now, when I went ahead and I sanded and buffed like this is how I usually do it, with my hands, and so it's kind of into my palm a little bit, and sometimes it's a little bit hard to a little hard to wield, a little hard to sand this, okay? And as I'm sanding it, I'm like, okay, this is okay, but I discovered really the best way, especially when you have a thin sheet of clay like this and you're trying to get your hands around it to try and sand it, well, there's a better way of doing it. And really that way was using a piece of tile. So I had a small piece of tile, I placed that into my water, I put the sandpaper on that tile and then braced it. And then I was able to easily sand the clay so much. Oh, it just made such a difference. I can't tell you. It was easy. It came up smooth so much faster for me. I didn't even have to really think about it. I just needed something solid to brace against it, and that tile was perfect for it. So each of these little pieces that I've got that I've made into these teardrops, I take all of them, I sand them with the 400 first, then the 600, and then the 800. Now there are, I want to say, some people will say go down to a 1200. It's truly up to you. I have always been successful at just going to 4 to 6 to 8. And I don't really have to go much more. In fact, sometimes I'll only use the 400 and 600 sandpaper and then go to my buffing machine. I really do think that the main thing here is that buffing machine and how you use it. It will be a little bit of practice for you if you've never done it before. It'll be a little bit of practice trying to just gently bring that clay up to it and get it so it's nice and buffed really well. All right, so I'm bringing in some of my pop can tin here, and yes, I'm using that pop can tin. Now this little board that I had underneath did not really work well. Get yourself a piece of just regular board, regular wood board. This was like pressed wood board. It didn't work really great. Get some regular wood, and then just go ahead, and I have a metal stamp here. There's all sorts of like little metal stamps that are out there. This one was a leaf type, and I just decided let's go ahead and see what it'll do in that pop can tin. I loved the results of it. It was great. So I took a strip, and this was about a 1/4 of an inch strip off of some pop can tin, and I just kind of hammered out a little bit of that pattern right into it. And we're going to place this into our pendant piece. So you can see that shine and that nice buff on that front side of that teardrop pendant. And we're going to go ahead and bring in a silver eye pin, and then that pop can tin, we're going to go ahead and take that strip and we're going to place this right over our clay piece. And I'm just going to fold it where it kind of lines up with that teardrop, and then do the same thing on the other side. Now if you need to, bring in your scissors and cut off the extra, and then fold the other piece to kind of conform to that teardrop clay piece. Once you have that, go ahead and put that to the side for a second. Take your eye pin, go ahead and make that little hook shape on the bottom end. And if you need to, you can go ahead and cut off a little bit of that hook if you've got too much. But if not, go ahead and place that down, and then bring in, and right there I've got some, I had to go ahead and trim up my eye pin just a little bit, but bring in your super glue and your liquid Sculpey, okay? And you're going to place a little bit of both on the back side. And the reason why I do this is I like the clay bond, clay to clay, okay? So I'm bringing in that liquid Sculpey. I'm doing that, but then I bring in a little bit of super glue, and that's so that I can make sure it doesn't move on me. The liquid Sculpey just, it likes to move. And I'm like, oh, no, 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 you gotta stay in one place. You gotta stay in one place, you know? And so that's where I'll bring in my needle tool, and with that super glue down, it will just make sure that the clay does stay in place and it won't move on you. So I take my needle tool and I just trim that out, and this way then I have my pendant piece. So then we'll go ahead and we'll bake that at 275 to 300 degrees. I do this at about, 7 to 10 minutes. And I like to make sure I come back in with my needle tool and I trim up any extra black clay I've got on that particular pendant. All right, so now at this point, this particular piece has been baked and it's been all done up, and I'm just going back in. I have already shined it up before, but I'm going back in and I'm re-shining it again. Anytime you put the clay back in the oven after you have sanded and buffed, sometimes it loses a little bit of its shine. So I'm just going back in to my little buffing machine here and just bringing it back up to that shine that I liked from before. Once I have that pendant piece all shined up the way I like it, I'm bringing in a jump ring. I'm going to open that up, put that into my little eye pin thing, and then I'm going to go ahead and add in my chain to this pendant and then box it up. Okay, so this time around, I'm just cutting some of that pop can tin, and I'm not even measuring it, okay? The last one I had measured to a 1/4 inch. This time I thought, we're just gonna randomly do this. And I brought in my little stamp again, and this time I used a wood block. I really decided I wasn't getting a great impression with the other piece, and it really made a huge difference. So I started stamping on the silver side, and then when I flipped it over to the gold, it really made a nice impression. You could really see it. And I thought this will be great when I add this into my pendant piece. I also decided to go ahead and create a little bit more because I wanted to make a matching earring set. So I took some more of that same tin and I made some smaller pieces, but then also stamped them as well. Again, I'm bringing in my eye pin. This time it's a gold eye pin, and then I'm just going to trim it up. And once I get that trimmed, I'm going to place that down onto my clay. And my clay was rolled out on a #1 setting on my Atlas pasta machine, so my second thickest setting. And I did that with all of the backing when it comes to my jewelry here. Anyway, once I have that, I'm going to bring in then my pendant piece. Now this one, I did not like the look of it. So that I had a lot of that white pearl right through the center. So I thought, let's go ahead and split that up with that gold pop can, and that made a huge difference in this design. If you have an area in one of your teardrop pieces or a jewelry piece where it's like, well, that just doesn't look really good, add in something like this. It makes such a difference because it breaks up a section that might be so big and it's not that very interesting to look at. And if you do that with this sort of thing, it creates a pendant piece that is more interesting to look at, more interesting to the eye. But from here, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys watch my hands talk as I finish up this pendant piece and its matching earring set. All right, so this is the end result of creating my marbleized jewelry and eggs in blues. Please use this for study and reference. And if you like this video, please like, subscribe, and leave me a comment. I'm always wondering what you're thinking. Otherwise, I am sending out my biggest hugs to each of you, and I hope you have a fantastic day.